Hello and welcome to the Politics Show in Northern Ireland. They named the policy CSI, and its road to legislation has certainly become a crime scene. We sifted through the evidence today to see if it's time to launch a murder investigation into the Executive's shared future policy.
And the worry is that it is in the interests of particular parties up at Stormont to keep things as they are, because then they have an electoral base that they can keep to themselves.
So who did it? The Alliance Party were supposed to be the policy's biggest supporters. Did they inadvertently plunge the knife by jumping too soon into government? I'll be asking Stephen Farry. And as the students cause mayhem on the streets in protest at changes to fees, I'll be asking two former undergrad activists what degree of success the protests have achieved. Christmas may be the time for peace on earth and goodwill to all, but how is our vision of a shared future progressing here in Northern Ireland? There have been almost 300 submissions to the consultation on the Executive's strategy for better community relations here. However, as Gareth Gordon has been finding out, many of the responses are highly critical of the draft document.
From the peace walls of Belfast to the walls of Belfast Linen Hall Library, one thing is clear: nowhere does division quite like Northern Ireland. From on high, the politicians at Stormont preside over a society where the lines of division grow higher and longer, peace process or no peace process. The Office of the First and Deputy First Minister has a strategy for dealing with it, the snappily titled Programme for Cohesion, Sharing and Integration. In one way, it has succeeded in bringing people closer together, in opposing it, that is. There are even those who believe ending division is not in some politicians' best interests.
From all the evidence we have from public attitude surveys, that there is a willingness, there's a keenness for people to be educated together, to be living together, to be working together, rather than to be divided forever along sectarian lines. And the worry is that it is in the interests of particular parties up at Stormont to keep things as they are, because then they have an electoral base that they can keep to themselves and monopolise for the future, and they haven't got the best interests of the broader public at heart.
Much of the criticism is that the strategy is short on detail and lacks vision. Its key themes are on developing shared spaces between the divided communities, reducing segregation, addressing flashpoint interface areas and promoting the expression of cultural identity. We asked the head of the Community Relations Council just what is lacking in the document.
People are still trying to deal with this as an add-on, something you can just tack on to everything else. We're saying no, you have to think about how you do our public housing strategy. We really have to start tackling education here. We have to do deals on culture so that we're not having annual stuff around parades. We have to make sure that the police are embedded in all these communities. This will take 20 years. But you know something, if this is a strategy document, it needs to set out the area, set out what's going to entail, and actually commit across government to applying the resources necessary.
Of course, what really matters is what people on the ground think, the people who live in Northern Ireland's divided communities. And it seems there's one thing they're not divided over: they don't think much of this new strategy either. Here in the loyalist Tynedale area of North Belfast, the community has already started to tear down the old symbols of division. A UFF mural used to occupy this gable wall. Now there's a garden of reflection and something altogether more artistic.
I don't think people understand what a shared future is. I think the document is quite vague in terms of its content.
This community worker says the document fails to address the problem of division on several levels.
Even in terms of the process and how the consultations were actually conducted. I think you have to remember where these communities are at. They're socio-economic deprived, they're low-income families, they haven't got the resources that other communities had. When you think consultations, the locations some of the consultations are held at, there's a travel cost associated with that. So does that exclude people from being able to contribute to that document? Yes, they can contribute by email, but there's a cost associated with that, and there's a skill level associated with that, more importantly. And does everybody within these communities have access to that? For me, I think it's a top-down document. of what a government and political architecture are saying what a shared future is to people and telling them what it is. To me, I think we need a bottom-up document. It's communities like this that have to say what a shared future is to them.
From the nationalist short strand, you can just about see the trappings of loyalism next door. This former Sinn Féin councillor now works for a cross-community interface project.
The document itself has delivered nothing to date. I would be hopeful that given the consultation period and hopeful that having listened to the submissions made that it will be in a position to deliver once it is completed and finalised.
You think they have to rewrite it completely?
Yes, I think there was nothing in it initially.
Nothing at all?
No.
In this season of goodwill, even the churches can't quite bring themselves to extend much Christian charity towards the politicians and their efforts.
It's a document published by the Office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister, who evidently represent their own party political interests, the communities that have elected them into office, and they therefore need to be representative of those communities. And we respect and acknowledge the fact that political leadership needs to bring their own communities and their own electoral mandate with them. But the temptation is that we hide behind our communities. The temptation is that we allow our fears of our prejudices and our misunderstanding and our distrust of one another to get in the way of the greater good, which is actually to build trust and to move beyond our fears.
You also get the impression that the document is really about OFM, DFM bringing responsibility and authority over all of the initiatives that are currently happening on the ground to them, so that they have centralised control of this issue. Now, that may or may not be a good thing, but certainly it's not the priority. The priority is to continue to fund and to help those projects that are established, up and running, and are having a big impact on the ground.
The Office of the First and the Deputy First Minister says analysis of the 290 written submissions received during the consultation is at an advanced stage. Ministers will then consider how best to strengthen the document with a view to publishing the final version as soon as possible.
Well, the Alliance Party MLA Stephen Farry is with me. Thanks for joining us. Do you agree that this policy is now dead? There's nothing in it?
It's certainly not dead, but we do recognise that the policy as drafted is seriously flawed and does need some major redrafting.
How serious? We heard one person in the film there say it needed to be completely rewritten.
Well, it probably does from top to bottom. I mean, there are flaws in terms of the vision. I mean, we're talking about a cohesive, shared, integrated society. The document doesn't deliver in terms of that vision. There's a real lack of detail as well in terms of the action plan, in terms of what we're actually going to deliver, the time frame, the resourcing that's going to go into that, and how we're going to monitor things, as well as the delivery mechanisms. Is a real threat, for example, to the Community Relations Council.
So that's pretty much nothing in it, completely rewritten, top to bottom.
Well, I think it's important, Jim, to recognise we're now in a situation where we have a public debate around these issues, which is something we didn't have before. The Alliance Party remains very, very committed to a shared future. It lies across everything that we do and has to lie across everything we do in Northern Ireland. For example, we were the only party to make any serious reference to a shared future in our economic proposals, our financial proposals around the budget. the other parties have ducked those critical issues.
But do you accept the bona fides of DUP and Sinn Féin on this, or do you agree with another contributor to the film there, Robin Wilson, who said that it is in the interest of some parties perhaps not to have a shared future?
Well, there's a real paradox here, because we do have a situation where the two relative extremes of the political spectrum are in government. But at the same time, we have to have a made in Northern Ireland community relations policy. In the past, every single community relations initiative, whether it's integrated education, the creation of the Community Relations Council, have all been top down from directorial ministers. If we're serious about embedding this in government, the parties in the lead and the executive have to have a sense of ownership of this.
But have the parties taken ownership? Have the DUP and Sinn Féin acted in good faith, or have they drafted something that is on purpose, not about achieving a shared future?
We are not there yet, and that's very important to make that very, very clear.
But can you trust them to deliver?
We can pressurise them to deliver and use our influence to make them deliver. We can make particularly very strong arguments regarding the current economic and financial situation, because whenever we're squandering over £1 billion every year on a divided society, whenever we're facing massive budget cuts, whenever we're struggling with inward investment because of divisions on the ground, those type of arguments appeal right across the spectrum, and anyone who's seriously interested in improving our economy has to take a shared future seriously.
But your pressure hasn't worked up to date. You can put it into your own policy documents so you're blue in the face. You said you wouldn't join this executive until there was a policy. This is a policy that you say has to be rewritten from top to bottom. What was the point of jumping at the point that you did?
Well, back in the spring, what we were very clear on is we achieved a commitment from the DUP and Sinn Féin to publish a draft. The Alliance Party,
a worthless one, by your own words.
The Alliance Party did not control the content of that draft at that stage. But to put it in context, we had over 3 years of drift in the executive with nothing happening on community relations policy whatsoever, following on from drift in previous devolved executives. What we have now done is actually forced us out to public consultation, let the people of Northern Ireland have their say, and to have this public debate where all the views can be brought in. Certainly the Alliance Party will not be signing off on any poor draft at the executive level, just to tick a box. We are serious about getting this right, and we will continue to travel on the road to ensure it's achieved.
Well, how long to that destination? It's unlikely to see anything coming to fruition before the election.
Well, certainly the pressure has to be maintained up until the election, but equally pressure will still be there afterwards. This issue is not going to go away. The divisions are still with us. We have had some improvements in line with the peace process, but there's still some very, very real problems out there. And fundamentally, there is a strong economic, financial and social rationale to getting this right. And if we don't, Northern Ireland is going to continue to stagnate.
But you've given up your leverage on it, and that's the point that some of your critics will make, that Alliance had perhaps had some leverage around the time that policing and justice was devolved. You decided to jump into the executive before you saw sight of the draft policy. Now we have sight of it. You say it's pretty awful. Most of the people who've been consulted say it's pretty awful. And where is your leverage to change that?
Well, I think it was important that we did take on the post of Justice Minister. And indeed, there's a very strong interface between justice and shared future issues. The fact that we actually have devolved justice actually helps bring stability to the society, which creates a context for building better relations and building that shared future. But also, David Ford is also engaging on issues such as trying to bring down the so-called peace walls. So there's real action that we can do through justice. There was a real political imperative to that. That issue has been taken off the table as a major issue of contention, and it was important we did that back then. But we are still working on a shared future, and we have a commitment from us that we will make sure it is got right and use whatever influence we have within the executive to achieve that outcome.
Okay, Stephen Farry, many thanks.
Thank you, Jim.